Our next speaker was also a speaker at the 2024 Summit, Jessica Chevrier, a licensed marriage and family therapist associate. She returns this year to expand on her impactful 2024 presentation. She will explore burnout not only as an individual challenge, but as a systematic issue requiring institutional solutions, providing practical strategies for boundaries and sustainability in the legal and the mental health profession. Welcome, Jessica. And Jessica is from El Paso. And so again, I say, you don't have to live in Houston to do really neat, creative things. So Jessica, take over.
All right. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to return to this just incredible space. I almost want to say it's really unfair to follow up the two amazing, incredible sessions before me, and then to be the one thing standing between you and your lunch. So with all of that, I will do the best that I can, but it is such a delight to be here with you today. As I said, my name is Jessica Chevrier. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist associate, and really what that means is I'm a systemic therapist, and I want to talk about systems. And my presentation last year was about, there's such a big issue right now about trying to address burnout, and that's wonderful, and I'm so grateful that we're talking about it. But when I hear people talking about burnout, it's always, I don't want to say always or never, but it's generally in the context of self-care, self-care, self-care. But you cannot self-care away a systemic issue. If you want to view that video from last year with the 10 points on how we as organizations can address burnout in our workplace cultures, in our society at large, that video I believe is on YouTube. So we'll briefly go through those points, but then also address today what can we actually do at an individual level that is systemic, that makes a difference, and that's boundaries. So before we jump into all of that, I have, again, the other lovely privilege of being your ethics hour. And the reason this is an ethics hour is because you have an ethical, you have an ethical obligation to the people that you serve. And usually these hours are all about all the ways that you can screw up and that you shouldn't screw up. But we miss that we have an ethical obligation to ourselves, and that when we are neglecting our own care, it compromises our ability to act in integrity with the people that we are serving. I want you to imagine you've got a dentist appointment coming up, and your dentist is running on an hour of sleep. How excited are we for that treatment, for that cavity getting filled? Don't we want providers, don't we want people that we're working with, especially when we're vulnerable with them, like our dentist, to be in a good place of self-care so that they can provide competent care to others? If the idea of taking care of yourself, advocating for yourself, having boundaries feels particularly selfish or foreign, then at least do it for the people that you serve, because they need you to be in a good place. All right, so let's breeze through the 10 points from last year and then go into boundaries. So we must allow questions and not punish or resent people for asking them. Trust and appropriate vulnerability are essential in functioning relational systems. The sooner we allow mistakes for ourselves and others, the less expensive the consequences are. If we do not cultivate time for rest and play, the time demanded will be more than we can afford. We need to model the emotional and mental health we want to see in others. We need to ask for help and ask people we lead what support they need from us. Normalize asking for help. When we put outcomes and bottom lines before people and relationships, getting to the outcomes we want will ultimately become too expensive. We need to push back on shame-saturated messaging by cultivating empathy and connection. We need to lean into hard conversations and be open to receiving mindful feedback in addition to giving it. This process is allowed to be messy, but as we keep leaning into it and giving grace for each other along the way, we can shape new cultures and ways of engaging. If you want to dive into each of those points much more extensively, the material from last year is available online. So now that we have that foundation, let's jump into boundaries. So I want you to think about you. I want you to think about you as I ask you these questions. So signs that you may struggle with boundaries. Do you say one thing while feeling the opposite? Here's the classic example. Yes, I'd love to bring cookies to the auction. Oh my gosh, I don't have time to do that. Why are you asking me? Yeah, relatable? Or, yeah, I can totally take on that assignment. I can file that today. Send that email to me, I'll fill it out. When it's like, oh my gosh, I can't do one more thing. Okay, you frequently feel overwhelmed or suffocated. You are angry a lot. You feel like no one does their part. Oh my gosh, don't we hear that all the time in the office? Kids these days don't want to work, and nobody da-da-da-da-da, and I'm the only one that's lifting anything in this. Or another group project. That just means I'm doing it by myself. Okay? Sorry, I'm in my feelings right now. Okay. You complain a lot. You feel like people are taking advantage of you. You resent people. You find yourself mentally replaying an issue over and over and over. Now, don't raise your hand for real. I don't want to out anybody. But mentally raise your hand. Like, yeah, some of that's me. Yeah, sure, I relate. And there's probably lots of other scenarios where you think about that. If any of this smacked you right in the core, let's talk about boundaries, because you need them, friend. I want to start with a story. So years ago, my husband and I love to be punctual to things. My husband, married an opposite in that regard, doesn't care for punctuality or time. And we were running late to a church meeting, my definition of late, not his definition of late. And we go into the room, and the only seats available are like this back weird eighth of a pew. We're like, okay, it's something. So we go and we sit down, and there's only enough room for me, my husband, a little bitty gap, and then a friend of ours that was on the other side of that gap. And then it's full. As you can tell, and why I don't like using the podium, I too am blessed with immense height. So I don't take up a ton of space as compared to much larger individuals like, I don't know, pro wrestlers or linebackers. So we go in, and I sit in my little spot, and there's this little bitty gap, and another individual rushing in as well sees the gap and sits on me. I kid you not. I am prone to be dramatic, but I kid you not. And they're sitting half in the gap and half on me. And I'm like, what is happening right now? And I'm just one of my afflictions is to be a people pleaser, so I'm just like, I just sit here as long as I can. And my leg starts going numb, because it's not hard to be a bigger person than me because I'm a small person. And I sit there for a little while longer, and in not advocating for myself, my leg is going painfully numb. Like, I've never been numb like this. This is fascinating and terrifying. And I start to bemoan my situation. Oh, Lord, why me? Why am I always the one that gets sit on? And immediately, the prompting that came to my heart was, darling girl, when has someone ever sat on you? Get up and advocate for yourself. And I was like, okay. And I literally, pulled my leg out and moved and sat in a different chair. And I can't remember anything else from that meeting, but I've never forgotten that experience. And, thank you, your polite and gracious laughs, I can hear some of you relating to the absurdity of the situation and also how unusual and what that feels like. And I want you to take those emotions, those feelings, that beautiful empathy that you're cultivating and accessing, and apply that is very much how we feel. That is the emotional flag on the field of, we need a boundary here. Someone is trespassing, whether it's psychological energy or emotional or spiritual, or in this case, very much physical, space that is not theirs, and they're crossing into mine, and I need a boundary. And here's the thing. We could assume a whole spectrum as assumptions about this individual. Maybe they hated me, and they came, and I'm gonna sit on her. Or realistically, they were just completely oblivious to the situation. And I can sit there, as I did, and bemoan the reality of my situation and demand that everything else in the situation change. But what am I in control of? Me. So regardless of whether it was justified, fair, or completely inappropriate, or just, I can't believe that they're so ignorant that I'm here, I have to do something, or I will not feel my leg anymore, okay? And I want you to think about that as we're discussing. And this is so unfair because really to do boundaries justice, we need like a part 16 somewhere down the line where we just keep going through boundaries. So this is not going to encapsulate everything, but hopefully there's points here that resonate with you, and you take what sticks, you take what impacts you, and you leave anything that doesn't, okay? Let's talk about vulnerability and shame. We've got to talk about these two things if we're going to talk about boundaries, because guess how vulnerable you're going to feel when you're enacting some boundaries? Feel pretty vulnerable. And a lot of times people can encounter vulnerability and feel like it's a sign that they're in the wrong, that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing because it feels foreign, because it doesn't feel okay, because we feel like a turtle and our belly is out and we don't feel safe. But that's also the emotional experience of doing something new. And if we can pause enough to identify that the presence of vulnerability isn't necessarily that we're in the wrong, just that we're in new territory. And then, of course, we need to talk about shame. And if you aren't already familiar with Brené Brown's body of work, please get familiar. Because I think this is some of the most important, like, being a human 101 stuff that we need to understand. I mean, we could do and should do hundreds of presentations about just shame, because that undergirds everything that, I mean, when we listen to these incredibly powerful presentations immediately before this morning, I heard shame. We felt shame. When we hear that systems are labeling people illegitimate children, and that reaction we felt in our gut, that's shame. That's a shaming label. Shame at its core is the feeling of unworthy of love and belonging, not good enough. We think about this all the time. Am I good enough? Am I, in whatever capacity or role that we may be thinking about, am I a good enough parent? Am I a good enough provider? Am I a good enough attorney? Am I a good enough advocate? Am I helping these people? Do they think I'm good enough? And good enough, good enough, good enough, good enough. That is something that we are navigating all the time. And when we are exercising our right to advocate for ourselves, when we are putting down boundaries, that is such a fast emotional reflex, is they're going to reject me, and connection is at stake. I'm not good enough. But we are worthy of love and belonging wherever we are. We have a right to be seen in our humanity, and you have a right to be protected and to advocate for yourself. So if you feel comfortable, for some people this is like a no, Jess, I can't do that. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes. And again, if you don't feel comfortable, I'm not making anybody do anything. But close your eyes, and I want you to just feel yourself in your body. And notice from the top of your head down to your toes, everything that you are feeling right now in this presence, in being embodied, this is everything you have control over. Everything outside of this is not in your control. Now open your eyes. That can evoke a whole range of emotions, especially when you are quite a small person. It feels like, wow, there's not very much I'm in control of. But the reality is, even though there's a distinct boundary around what is within my agency, what I can control, there's still so much I can do with that. And so many issues in relationships and societal ills are things being flipped, where I'm putting 90% of my energy into trying to control everything else, everyone else, and not myself, not what's going on with me. I love this slide. This is a little bit more of a deep dive into the things that we actually can control. So even though you're the only thing you can control, let's talk about how powerful that actually can be. Your words, your reactions, your boundaries, asking for support, your perspective, your attitude, your efforts to heal. And your media choices. There are things you can influence, and there are things that you can't touch. And there's balance in navigating all of that. We've got to understand this if we're going to talk about good boundaries. So point number one, Good boundaries require awareness to the emotions you are experiencing in a situation. These are my least common denominators of emotions. My clients make fun of me. They call this the avocado thing because we spell it out, it's H-A-S-S-S-S, like a Hass avocado. And all emotion, according to Jessica, can be boiled down to these 6, or combinations of them. And these 2 are probably the most relevant to pay attention to. Anger, because it's what we call a secondary emotion, meaning that when anger shows up, it is in response to the S's being present. One, all, or a combination. And then shame tends to be the most significant one to listen to. Again, that's that feeling of not being worthy of love and belonging, not good enough. And shame, Brené Brown points out, is the most contagious affect that we can experience. How quickly, when we hear things that break our hearts today, do we have this emotional response? Because shame, just Brené Brown says, will crawl across the floor and grab us by the throats. And even in those audiences that I believe Monique talked about, where there is no response, there's shame in the silence, the implied not good enough. So we need to be aware of these things, because when we're not, we're in a reactive state. Your emotions will be heard. Very much like I've got 5 kids, my youngest is 4. I think about them all the time when I think about emotions, because emotions are very much like my sweet Sammy. He's gonna be heard. He's got big feelings and you're gonna hear them. And that doesn't disappear in us. And we can try to stuff them down, we can try to tell them to shut up, and they'll show up later. Maybe in your tension headaches, maybe in your chronic stomach conditions, all sorts of other ways that stress stays in the body. When we're aware of what's going on with our emotions, it pulls a significant percentage of the emotional energy of the processing off, just being able to identify them. And if we can identify them, we can move into a psychological state that's more intentional, rather being reactive. I'm not in a flooded state in my mental space. I'm in an intentional state. And that's really important, because the reality is, whether you're a litigator, you're a caseworker, you're a judge, we have these incredibly refined skills that have a specific place for use. When I'm working with police officers, when I'm working with first responders or soldiers, El Paso is home to Fort Bliss, so I get a lot of soldiers. They have specific skills that they need, that have kept them safe, that have kept other people safe. But those skills can only be used in specific areas. And they run into struggles when those skills are overextended into other areas of their life, in civilian life. So too with all of us that have these specific skills, say litigation. Probably know, without me giving the answer, how happy is your spouse when you're litigating them, right? That's great marriage, right? My husband's a public defender. There's definitely fight, and I'm guilty of this too, right? It's probably super hard to be married to a marriage counselor. But we're perfectly honed to attack each other. And my husband has definitely said to me, like, don't be my therapist right now. And I've definitely been like, stop being an attorney right now, be my husband. So we have these skills that are honed, that are necessary, and what we need for helping our clients or advocating for people when we're deliberating. Those skills aren't necessarily the best skill set in the civilian world, in other spaces. And the thing is, when we're in chronically reactive spaces, we go to those life-saving skills. We go to those high-stakes skills. And when we can move into intentional spaces, we get to peruse our toolbox and decide what we actually want to use, as opposed to going to our default hammer and trying to treat everything like a nail. And we need that if we're going to have good and mindful boundaries. So the first rule of boundaries, if you want to, and I hope you do, dig into boundaries a good bit, my favorite book on boundaries is the Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. Amazing resource. And she and Brené Brown share this point. Clear is kind, and kind is clear. Ambiguity, passive aggressiveness, these things may spare us hard conversations or difficult affects in a moment, but we're just postponing. It's like when my kids say they've cleaned the living room and they sweep everything under the rug literally, or find it in a pile in a corner of the room. You're gonna have to deal with it at some point, and it might get nastier, right? So clear is kind, and kind is clear. We'll talk about that with more examples down the line. Boundaries are popular, at least in my algorithm on social media right now, and I love that we're talking about it more. And so often now if clients come in and I'm like, okay, well, tell me, they'll describe this awful situation with mother-in-law or family or their spouse. I'm like, okay, talk to me about what your boundaries are here. I'm like, oh yeah, I love boundaries. I'm all about boundaries. And what they describe to me is not a boundary. So, and I'll hear examples, celebrities or different people like, this is my boundary. And I'm like, oh, friend, that's not a boundary. So let's talk about what boundaries actually are. We've got boundaries, expectations, and ultimatums. Now, boundaries are your personal standards focused on your needs. Really, the focus is going to be the big differentiator in each of these situations. Focus is on you. Tone, ideally, is clear and respectful, and it's flexible. It can change as your needs change because you're a dynamic individual. Expectations are generally unspoken, implied things about how you should behave. Now, that doesn't mean that every expectation or even most expectations are like good expectations, right? This is especially true when we come into differing family cultures. And really, every family culture is different because, how I grew up, how my spouse grew up, how my neighbor grew up, we've all got different cultures. And in those cases, when they blend, we learn a lot about different expectations of how things should go, okay? It's a focus on other people's behavior, and it's usually unclear. This presents a lot of double binds. It's really easy for it to generate resentment, because even though expectations are implied, a lot of implied things, unspoken things in the family, in our relationships, workplace relationships, cultural expectations have so much power. You've probably never had a boss that said, listen, no, the law says we gotta let you take some time off, but don't you ever, right? No one's ever gonna actually be like, we don't take time off here, or they shouldn't, good grief. But we have all felt, this is what you don't do in this office. Yeah, those are HR rules, but it's HR. We don't actually report issues. We don't actually address issues. We just quietly deal with things and die inside, right? So those implied things, they take a big toll. And then ultimatums. This is what I hear the most when people think they have boundaries. They have ultimatums. And ultimatums are a demand that's framed with a threat or a consequence if others do not comply. So it's you better, or I'm not gonna da-da-da-da-da. It's focused on controlling others. It's forceful, it's coercive, it's very rigid and high stakes. So, examples that I can think of, classic example of, yeah, I have boundaries. No one's allowed to email me after 5. Okay, how do you enforce that? You beat people, you emailed me after 5. What do you do about that? And notice how that's an expectation. It's not a boundary. Because what would a boundary in that situation actually be? It's focused on what I can do. I don't respond to emails after 5. Biggest fix to a boundary issue is am I making it about my behavior? A boundary is only about what I will do in a situation to help my needs or if I'm uncomfortable. If you talk to me that way, I'm going to leave the conversation, as opposed to, don't you dare talk to me that way. Or if you talk to me that way, I'm not inviting you to Christmas dinner. Oh, dang, okay? Love this from Melissa Urban. She has a conceptualization of green light, yellow light, and red light, this spectrum of noticing where we need boundaries. So green light is kind of just like, oh, all right, this is uncomfortable. I think we need some boundaries here. And it may be the gentle introduction of a boundary in a situation. Hey, I know you asked me about that assignment. I really don't have the bandwidth to take that on right now, and I'm not gonna be able to commit to that project. Green light. Hopefully also the doorway to a collaborative discussion. Now, what's really important is there's a distinction between when boundaries are applicable, and honestly, a lot of times you need a conversation. And hopefully you've had conversations prior to the need for a boundary, unless there's situations where it's just like, I don't have a relationship with you, you are the Starbucks person behind the counter, like, this is not going anywhere. So boundaries that I just may need to implement because this is a very short-term relationship. But hopefully, ideally, when it's a long-term relationship, there's room for collaboration. My stipulation on that, though, is collaboration is sustainable in a relationship where there's reciprocity, meaning that there's mutual respect, there's care for each other. I can ask for my needs, you can ask for your needs, and I'm not gonna get ugly or defensive or dismissive because you're taking up space, right? That we both have permission to do that. In cases, in relationships where that's just not okay, and that's not the norm, unfortunately, you got a boundary up. So this is a little bit how. Green light, introduction, hopefully the doorway to a collaborative discussion. If not, yellow light. Hey, you know, I saw that email that you're following up if I'm gonna do this project. I'd like to remind you that I'm not in a place that I can do that. So I'm not gonna be able to, in fact, I'm not gonna be able to respond to those emails, or I might forward them on. Red light, executing the boundary. I'm not taking this project. If you ask me about it again, I'm gonna have to forward this to HR. And I mean, realistically, we're listening to these principles, and a lot of times the question is like, well, how do we do that? Or this is really hard to figure out. This is a dialogue internally and a discussion. Find your 2-3 people that, these are my people, this is I'm safe with. Discuss back and forth every time. And I talk about boundaries with all my clients, day in, day out. But every time I execute like a hard-fought boundary, I still message my people, I'm like, I did it. And I take a big lap around the field. Give yourself permission to do that, because that's how we fight shame too, is we need to be able to speak up and share these things. Another big exercise I really, really like from Melissa Urban is she says, scale things on a 1 to 10. And you think about, how frustrated I am about this potential boundary violation. And kind of a 3, maybe it's room for a compromise. It's just something, okay, we'll have to navigate that later. If it's above a 5, figure out how big your boundary needs to be and have a conversation about that. So that's, I think, for me, has been a good scale of, yeah, I can let this one go. Or it's like, nope, it's time to boundary up. Okay, number 3, boundaries are about putting anxiety and control in their proper places. I want to draw back to that analogy in the beginning of feeling sat upon. I think that is such an important thing for us to become emotionally aware of is, ooh, this feels like trespass here. This feels like you've stepped into a place that is not yours to step in. It's not okay. And when I'm in that curious space, I can say, okay, well, what am I going to do about it? And so much, I have this slide from last year of 2 people playing hot potato. And that's very much how anxiety can function in relational systems, like this hot potato that gets just passed around, and passed around. And the reason why boundaries are a systemic intervention is it's somebody saying, I'm not gonna play hot potato. You guys can keep playing, but I'm not going to engage in this way. I'm gonna define my terms of engagement. And boundaries are very much about helping at least us as individuals and giving cues to the system. There's a lot of anxiety getting passed around here, and it's not mine to own. Or this is my anxiety, I'm not gonna extend it over to here, and I'm gonna manage and care for myself appropriately, or get relational feedback from people that I have space and permission to share that with. The other thing that this is really a big deal to me about is realistically every person here within the sound of my voice is here because they care. They care so much. And you maybe even identify yourself as, I'm a caring person, I'm an advocate, I'm fighting for other people. And that is a fire in your heart. We are at such high risk of burnout and compassion fatigue when we don't have boundaries. Because a person who cares without boundaries is frankly dangerous. You have to have boundaries to provide ethical care. And in issues I've seen of colleagues or other professionals I'm aware of where they did have to get disciplined, it's because a lot of the time they weren't taking care of themselves and they were vulnerable when a situation was ambiguous or unclear, and then it got much more complicated. So we've got to have these boundaries to take care of ourselves. And when we think about the populations that we serve, so much trauma. I can think of instances where I was so invested in a case, wanted to do everything I could, wanted to help that person out, and then it came to a point where it's just like, I can't keep going with this. This person is wearing me out. And I wasn't exercising good boundaries. I wasn't exercising good self-care. And then very, young in trying to figure out how to navigate that, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate, you just pull back quite a bit. And we have people that are engaging with these community resources with the judicial system that are really honestly scarred by helping professionals because nobody's there for me, they say they care, they don't. And I think the way we navigate that is we've got to have good boundaries, because if I have good boundaries and that allows me to stay engaged with somebody consistently, I am helping heal an attachment injury with providers, with the face that I represent for that individual, instead of being another cog in the machine that shows up, disappears, shows up, disappears. So is it cruel to have boundaries if it allows me to have longevity working with somebody? Is it actually kind to show up in a really big way and then disappear because you can't do it anymore? We need boundaries. The other reason that this is an ethical consideration. Okay, so just again, what can you control? It's you. Your time is sacred. You are not a non-renewable resource. You are a non-renewable, no. You don't have infinity to give, and that's okay. You have a finite amount that you can give that you need to recharge. Your time is precious. You need to determine who gets to be in your presence, who gets to have the privilege of working with you, of a relationship with you, and boundaries help determine kind of the admissions fee a little bit there. Number 4, boundaries can only be about your behavior and what you will do in a situation. So again, the email example. So boundaries are something that we need in every area of our life. Absolutely in parenting, in our workplace, in our intimate relationships, with ourselves. And I laugh because right now my big boundary space is with my 4-year-old. He's developmentally appropriately limit testing. It also developmentally appropriately sucks. And he's the youngest of 5, so he's used to having 6 other slaves. And he's sitting at the stairs, and I'm like, hey, buddy, we gotta go. And he's like, I can't put on my shoes. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, you need a boundary here. Because I'm like, I am at my limit of loving you right now. You cannot shoe yourself. And I was like, okay. And I'm identifying my emotion. I'm very frustrated at this individual that is mine. And I'm like, okay, well, are you a big boy or a little boy? He's like, I'm a big boy. And I was like, oh, big boys, they put their shoes on. And little boys, they, don't put their shoes on. And he's like, I'm a little boy. I'm like, all right. You have a right to your identity and identifying that. And I was like, well, in our house, big boys get an allowance. And he had just gotten his first $1 that week, and was like, yeah, candy. And then he was like, oh. And I was like, yeah, so little boys, they don't get an allowance, though. And he's like, and putting that shoe on. And, it's a little low-stakes example. But that's the spirit of so much of what we need to do in other situations. How many times have we been cornered in the office by somebody that just had, a very hard situation? They just start trauma dumping on you right there in that hall outside the break room. And it's like, man, I don't have the bandwidth for this right now. Or we all saw some hard stuff today. Man, what do we do with that? And all these spaces where we're navigating really complex human interactions. And people deal with that in different ways. So sometimes boundaries are, hey, I get that was really hard. I'm just not going to be the space that you can process that with right now. Or I've got 5 minutes to give you. That's probably or clients that call and they're like, you are my now therapist, unlicensed right here. You're my therapist right now. I'm going to dump. And, or me, I'm an actual therapist. How many people are happy to come to me and be like, it's time for my life story? It's like, all right, this is not what I wanted, and it's also unpaid. So that's great. And we need boundaries around those interactions because, again, you're a finite resource. And it's not fair for people without your consent to just come in sometimes. And there's going to be spillover where it's just, there's moments, and sometimes those moments are sacred, where we just show up and we give. But that can't be every moment. That can't be every single interaction that we're having with people, or you'll have nothing left. And, for me, some of the personal rules or boundaries that I have is this conversation's going to be 15 minutes. Sometimes I articulate that to people, and a lot of times it's like, oh, you know what, I've got another thing right now. You've got to decide in what spaces, what boundaries you need to have. Good boundary. You doing work while you're on vacation? I sure hope not. Are you giving yourself permission to step away from things? Do not disturb is my favorite feature on my phone. And I've got exceptions. Yeah, my husband can call me. It's an emergency. But there's time that is just mine, and I get to recharge, and you're worthy of that, okay? You don't have to be worthy of that. You are inherently worthy of that. You don't you don't have to do anything to earn that. You don't work for your next breath. You are entitled to your next breath. You don't have to work to deserve play and rest and advocacy and boundaries. You are entitled to that. This is an actual photo I took on a road trip to Georgia. And it was, yeah, that's real. And this is so much our emotional experience when we're in situations that really need a boundary, this double bind situation, the damned if you do, damned if you don't. When we're in situations that elicit a damned if you do, damned if you don't, boundaries. What are you going to do? Double binds are when the rules of the game mean that you will lose no matter what. Boundaries let you change the rules of the game. If I feel like, you're expecting this of me, and you're expecting this of me, and if I back off, it shows the team that I'm lazy or not, I gotta change the rules. I'm allowed to advocate for myself. Guys, I've got this coming up at home, and I'll have to jump in later, but I really can't be on team calls after 5. I really am not gonna be able to take that case on. I just had a huge trial the other week. Can we send that to somebody else? Hey, you know what, I need to use my sick time right now to recover from this. It was a lot, and that's okay. Boundaries disrupt the status quo and change systems. When systems change, discomfort is normal. I have yet to establish a boundary where I was like, yay, I did that, and nothing feels awful about this at all. It's always like, oh crap, they're gonna be mad at me. Yeah, what's the fallout going to be here? And that doesn't mean that the boundary isn't necessary. Okay, so this is one of my favorite examples. I'm throwing my husband under the bus here a little bit more. And so I had come home from a really hard day at work, and I was just like, babe, I just need to jump in the shower and hear nothing, touch nothing, just be a human blob. And he's like, that's totally fine, I get that. I'm gonna start working on the taxes. It's like, okay, good for you, love that. I'm unavailable. I'm not gonna help you find documents when you're trying to find the kids' social security cards, which there's a lot of them. It's not me, babe. And he's like, oh yeah, of course. When you establish a boundary, the people who benefit the most from your lack of boundaries will be the first to protest, just FYI. Normalize that. That doesn't mean that they're spiteful, horrible people. Sometimes they are. But generally, it's just, oh, I thought this would be available. 2 minutes into my shower, a little, wandering in, hey babe, by the way, where is? And it was like, My husband helped me write a huge poster, we have a boundaries, so I just start quoting it. I was like, when you have boundaries, the people who benefit, and he's like, oh, okay, and leaves. 3 minutes later, comes back, but real quick, and it was like, no. Now, how often, and this is what I experience the most with my clients, how often we say, yeah, I have boundaries, but they violated my boundaries. Because guess who's in control of your boundary? Yeah, that sucks. Because it's on you. And so many times, there's been instances where a husband comes in, and I'm just like, oh, okay, just real quick, it's under the file cabinet, and da-da-da-da. And I'm not honoring my boundary. And when I'm choosing, what you choose when you don't have a boundary is you choose resentment. And that starts to percolate. So is that really, I'm sorry, I saw some of you wince at that. That's how it is today, friends. When we don't choose boundaries, we choose resentment. And that goes back to the clear is kind is clear. Because is it kind to just be frothing with resentment all the time at people that you're not having boundaries with? What is so heartbreaking to me is when I have families and couples come in that have decades of passive-aggressive behavior where they didn't have boundaries, they didn't advocate or take up space, and it's just turned into resentment. And it gets to a point where it's cemented resentment, and that's awful and hard. When we look at that in terms of the populations that we're serving, we can all think of, or maybe we are, and frequently we're sometimes are, people that are really done. I can't keep doing this anymore. This is too hard. Too many people messing up. How do we change these systems? I can't do anything. And that burnout talk is really heavy and big. And that's not something that I want for anybody. That's not something that you want for yourself, and it's heartbreaking to hear. It's heartbreaking when we know advocates that have that advocate death, and they can't advocate anymore. It's too much. It's too hard now. We need boundaries so that we don't turn into rocks of resentment, so that we can keep giving care, so that we can keep humanizing the people that we're working with to humanize ourselves. This is vulnerable. It's so uncomfortable. It's okay, because if all of us commit to doing this more, then we're not doing it alone, at least. Now, the other big question people have is like, well, when I have boundaries, I'm worried I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings. Well, let's differentiate between discomfort and harm. I like this analogy of a speed bump as opposed to a car accident, okay? Discomfort it's important data. Hey, slow down. Something's amiss here. Doesn't mean stop. Doesn't mean don't drive. Just let's slow down. Check out what's going on. It's short-lived, even if it's an intense emotional experience. Can signal growth, learning, or change. And while it's uncomfortable, it's fundamentally safe unless you're one of those crazy speed bump drivers. Let's talk about harm. A violation of someone else's safety, whether it's emotional, physical, or relational. It undermines well-being and trust. And it leaves a lasting impact with painful consequences. The car accident metaphor is really, really good too for a discussion around intent and impact. It doesn't really matter what your intention is. I mean, maybe there's some mitigating factors and it's interesting, but if a car still hit somebody else, we're less concerned about like, oh, well, you were texting and driving, or you were on your phone, or you just got this awful phone call. It's like, hey, there's damage here that we need to attend to. So when we're worried about hurting somebody else, understand that we're accountable for harming somebody else, but if the boundary is just producing discomfort, we're not responsible for somebody else's discomfort. And if we really care about somebody, discomfort can be an intervention. Discomfort may be a tool that they need. We had a situation a few years ago where the other therapist in my office, she had a client that showed up for a session and then no-showed for the second session. One of our boundaries is if you no-show without notice, you're charged for the full session. And people learn real fast to communicate with us. And this gentleman no-showed and was charged and called and was like, I don't even know who you guys are. I've never been to this, to this office. And I was like, okay, let's confirm your identity. Are you so-and-so? Yes. I'm like, are you at this location? Yes. I have your digital signature on these documents. Oh, okay, I remember signing something. Like, yeah, so you did show up. We've met you. And you had a session and you chose not to show up again, which is your right. And that's why we charged you. That was a not fun conversation. In my top 10 conversations, it's not anywhere near like best conversation I've ever had. It was a boundary conversation though. And even though there was immense discomfort by me, and I'm sure by them, they didn't want to pay for this. Sure, I get that. It was also an intervention and therapeutic in and of itself, because is this an appropriate way to treat people that we work with? It's not. And maybe they learned that time, maybe they didn't, but it was an opportunity for learning. So even though sometimes there's a lot of discomfort involved in these situations, we teach people how to treat us with our boundaries. And when we don't have boundaries, we're telling people, please, I'm a doormat. Why don't you walk all over me? That's what I'm here for. Is that actually what you want? No. And is that what you want to teach people that matter to you? No. You cannot caretake for someone's feelings and enforce your boundaries at the same time. So many times when we start to put a boundary out there, like, hey guys, you know, I'm gonna be on vacation, so I'm not gonna be communicating. Somebody emails you, and you wanna send back that email, oh, I'm actually on vacation, I'm so sorry, you can look it up here, da 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 da. You're violating your boundary, one, and two, you've just taught the other person, they don't mean it. Like, if I have an issue, then I can reach out to them. And then lo and behold, they have so many issues. And every vacation you take is just like the biggest reason crises happen. It's because you're on vacation. Or we can have some boundaries and people can figure things out without you. If you died tomorrow, your job would keep going. They'd figure things out without you. They'll tell you how necessary you are, how important you are, how fundamental you are for a situation, and then things go wrong, they replace you real fast. So you gotta advocate for yourself. You need the boundaries here. And when you're apologizing, you're opening the door to, my boundary doesn't mean anything. It's up for debate. One of my favorite acronyms around boundaries. You do not need to justify, argue, defend, or explain. JADE. The reason this is important is because when you start to explain why you're not going to do what you're going to do, it sends the message to the other person that this is up for debate. Or if I just fit in these parameters that they're describing, then their boundary will disappear. If your boundary is not negotiable, don't offer an explanation. And it is okay to tell people, yeah, I'm not discussing that right now. No, that's not a question I'm comfortable answering. Thank you, though. There's a lot of good phrases we can come up with. And the Book of Boundaries is incredible for the amount of scripts that it has. For the sake of time, I can't go into everything that I want to. But go there, check that out. Lots of good scripts for how do we navigate, how do we come up with phrases that we want to say for these situations. Number seven, boundaries with yourself may be just as important as boundaries with others. I'd actually change this. Boundaries with yourself are the most important boundaries that you can have. And just as much as you build resentment when your boundaries are violated with other people, build a lot of resentment with yourself when you violate your own boundaries. I've been trying to have better boundaries around my own sleep habits. Guess who violated her boundary about that last night and is super resentful this morning towards herself? Future me didn't appreciate that. So we've got to have these boundaries with ourselves. And honestly, the decision to have boundaries is the first boundary that you have with yourself. To be clear, that clear is kind and kind is clear is a boundary with yourself. I'm going to be clear. I'm going to have boundaries. I'm going to enforce these boundaries. It's the first baby step to the boundary, is that I'm going to be self-confronting and honest enough that I'm going to make sure that I'm advocating for myself. Self-care is a boundary. Do put a little plug in there for self-care. My boundaries around self-care. I'm going to budget because I feel less anxiety about my future when I am budgeting. I'm going to do yoga today because I need movement and I feel good in my body and have a better relationship with my body and others when I'm in that space. I was the dork that raised my hand for the art, for drawing. But because painting is my balm. When I have a client or a case that's been really, really difficult, and I hear a story that just makes me want to just cry, drawing is what I've done since I was a little kid. And what are your boundaries around play? You need to play. You need space that you can just. What did you do as a child that made the hours pass like minutes? And for me, it was drawing. For me, it was painting. And I hadn't drawn or painted for years. And I found that again. And that's something that is so restorative, even though it's an expenditure of energy for me. And I have to have boundaries around that. I'm gonna sit down and just draw for 10 minutes, sometimes between sessions, and just doodle a little bit. What do you need to do that brings back restorative time into your life, and have boundaries around that? So many times we self-care. It's good that we're trying to self-care, but we first aid self-care, meaning we don't self-care until after a crisis, after a situation's been really hard. Like, oh, okay, now I should self-care. Well, that's good, but it's not sustainable. What if I told you, y'all, from now on, you gotta budget your breathing? Sorry, figure it out. And maybe one breath every minute. Yeah, there'd be like a revolt right now. You can't do that to me. But we do budget our play, and it's not one breath a minute. It is, I'll rest after this project. What if we approach rest and play and had boundaries around expecting ourselves to do that the way that we don't earn breathing, the way that we are entitled to oxygen? And wouldn't that be so much more sustainable, instead of essentially living emotionally paycheck to paycheck? Something comes and it's just too emotionally expensive, and then we're living in a deficit. That's awful. That feels awful. Don't wait to self-care. Proactively self-care. Just like you don't wait to shower. I hope you don't. Okay, I always want to put a plug in for the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. It's another boundary. This field is such high risk for, I don't love the term addiction, I love the term compulsive comfort seeking, because it speaks to the mechanisms of what's actually going on. You have a right and a need for comfort, but there are maladaptive behaviors. And are we getting to a place where it's becoming compulsive comfort seeking that's not serving our needs? And do I need to have boundaries around getting the help that is appropriate for what I need? Number 8, you do not owe people an explanation for your boundaries. However, people who you can trust to have hard conversations may be worthy of one. Again, goes back to that, is there reciprocity in this relationship? Is there mutual respect and care? That I can say, I'm struggling with this, and this person's receptive to that. I had an interesting situation a couple months ago where I had a situation I was helping a friend with that was very high stakes and scary, and was an interaction with law enforcement and mental health services. And so I was helping them navigate that, because it's scary when you don't know what's available, or you're in an area that frankly is lacking in many services, which unfortunately El Paso is. And I was helping them navigate that, and we had some stuff pop up with our family. And I messaged this friend, and I was just like, I'm so sorry, I've got to step back from this. And they're like, Jess, thank you so much. I totally get it, take care of you. And that's a relationship that there's a lot of love, a lot of respect and understanding. Simultaneously in that situation, there was another individual that I had to set a boundary with, and it was really hostile. I was like, wow. And this is what's really powerful gift about boundaries when you have them in your life. It is a spotlight on people that you really want to cultivate more of a relationship with, and people that are not going to be the best in your life or that you need bigger boundaries on. And that, I mean, if we could, you know, if you could look out in the world and people wore t-shirts like, I'm gonna be a great friend to you, or like, stay away from me, that's what boundaries can do when we get really good at exercising and having them. Okay, this is one of my all-time favorite quotes from Dr. Sue Johnson, who passed away recently. She said, "There are no injury-proof relationships, but you can dance with greater verve and panache if you know you can recover when you step on each other's toes." So in these conversations around expectations, around these collaborative conversations, where we can compromise as opposed to necessarily really needing a really hard boundary, it's okay for it to be a dance. And navigating and having grace for each other can make this a lot more productive process when that's necessary. Number 9, executing your boundaries should come from a place that honors your integrity and the humanity of all parties. So people treat you poorly, respond in a way that is consistent with your integrity. You don't have to be nice to people that aren't nice to you, but you do have to live with yourself the rest of your life. So behave in ways that honor your integrity and humanity, even if the other person isn't really honoring your humanity. Another rule around boundaries: say what you mean and mean what you say. What oath do people take when they have to testify in court? I know a lot of you know it. I'd love to hear it. Tell the truth? Say it louder for me, please.
Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
We bring God into it even. Yeah, swear over him, yes. Not by show of hands in your heart. Who does this in real life consistently, right? When somebody's like, hey, are you really okay with this? How many of us are like, no, absolutely not, right? Do we tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Are we consistent in what we are communicating and what we desire? It is so uncomfortable. And if it was like, just boundaries are so foreign to me, I don't even know where to start. Start there. Say no. Say no to things when you want to. And that will start making some waves for you. Okay? Tell the truth when you actually feel comfortable with something. And in those spaces that are worthy of those collaborative discussions, it becomes this really beautiful springboard of managing expectations and helping people get their needs met. You are allowed to be imperfect. And you, as you are right now, you do not have to feel guilty for being human. This is a messy process. It is so vulnerable, but it's okay for it to be messy. And it's okay for us to navigate this. And the more that we navigate this together, the better off all of us are. And that's why this is a systemic change. I can just speak from me and my experience of helping other people with this. But there's so much liberty that can come from this. And this is also complex. I'm not gonna stand here and be like, boundaries fix everything, guys. Because there's situations that are inherently very complicated. But can we all focus a little more attention on controlling what we can control and advocating for ourselves? And won't that help this whole field? Thank you so much for your time today.